If I remember the chronology right, Michelle, let me know if I'm wrong on this. There was a episode between Michelle Sanduni and Javier Rivera on relationships that inspired me at the time going through relationship challenges in my life. Corresponded to going into art therapy, be writing a piece on art therapy and its significance and meaning for me. Michelle loved it. I got hopped on a call with her and Sanduni about relationships. And then as an aside statement on that, Michelle really wanted to have a conversation on the power of imagery in art therapy. And then and basically the title, this is Art Therapy as an Instrument of Understanding, which is a topic I love very much. Because besides my treatment in art therapy, I also got incredibly interested in Carl Jung, who was very much interested in the power of imagery and icon for understanding. So this is a conversation I was looking forward to for a very long time. So Michelle, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Thomas. Very happy to be here and thankful for your time.
So, I mean, Michelle, where do you want to get started? I mean, in terms of, I think we can would you like me to kind of give you some chronology of the art therapy experience for me, or your interest in the topic? Like, which way would you like to go?
Yeah, well, maybe I can ask you a question about it, about art therapy. And, I wonder, like, why did you, like, what was it about art therapy where it was just like, I'm going to give this a try? There are lots of different types of therapies out there, especially today. So what was it about art therapy that was like, yeah, I'm going to do that?
Okay, that's a great question. So first note was, I didn't like the fact of just talking, because talking is just like this, it seems like just this air of something like just this puff of air that just fades away to nothing. So at the end of the therapy, it's kind of like at the end of the discussion, it's gone. You don't have anything material with it. Even because I just know from just conversations with people, at the minimum, you should be taking notes. You need some material objects to work with. Otherwise, you're just in the moment. So for me, there was that issue. And then also too, it just felt like, personally for me, I was very antagonistic to therapy, mainly because I felt like this issue of people who don't have to go to social bonds. So they have to rely on an external person, you have to pay to listen to them, emotionally regulate their emotions. That's the thing too. Also, I just wasn't really interested on just sitting there in a kind of infanticide emotional state that we're going to just talk about emotions and that's the end of it. And that's the end of the conversation, especially as a male. I was just like, that's not really what I'm interested in. Because what originally even brought me in to get interested in therapy was, well, wait a minute, I'm in this relationship that ended in complete catastrophe, that it's something about this relationship failure that was not me. Something's up here. So I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to seek out what I can do to improve my relationships going forward for my own sake. So I was in a very proactive mode relating to it. And I wanted something of substance to hold it together. And I thought just talk therapy by itself wasn't going to cut it, in my opinion, an estimate. So also I am from an art background, so I just felt natural. It felt very natural to think about the arts because I was using it all the time, but always usually either represent reality, right, external reality, or achieve objectives. So these were very instrumental or documentary procedures of art, right? So the measurement of art in art school would be how well did you reproduce the still life, for example, or the model, right? There's a kind of correspondence measurement of how well your accuracy is, or either by direct depiction or by the essence of it. So you capture the essence of the movement, for example. So even when you're abstracting, you're still trying to capture something substantial, like the real thing in front of you, which is still external to you. Versus when you go into design training, it's more about using the art principles for meeting objectives. So you have an outcome you need to hit, increase in either RSVPs or sales. There's some external metric, and you're using now art representation and form making to achieve that goal. So again, it's all externalized execution. So that's why I thought using now those trainings of articulation, what if we turn that inward to kind of focus on the internal models and understandings and misunderstandings? That's kind of my opinion about how I got started about it, or thinking about going into it.
Yeah, that's really great. And I remember it now, like, because we know we after we had spoken with Sanjuni, we spoke a little bit about art therapy, and I remember you bringing this up. Like, there's something so almost too ephemeral about just words, where like the talking therapy is just, it's like you said, it almost feels like you could just be kind of sitting there, like, it could end up feeling like you're also just kind of complaining, or like, now I'm just venting for venting. Like, there's a place for venting, right? But there's also, venting is so you make some sort of progression, or process through whatever you're going through. And sometimes, if that, I mean, it's like there's only maybe so much time that can take to do, but then what, like you're saying, what are you left with in a sense of like, I have accomplished something in doing so, and it's less easy to point to anything for that, right? And in some ways, like I remember you saying that, and I thought that was so good and so true. And why often I feel like making arts, because we talked about like there's almost like you make artifacts. I don't know if you remember us using that term, but it's almost, there seems to be like something in art therapy where when you actually make the artifact, you have a sense of your own history, like of what you've actually gone through and what you've learned from it. And I've always thought about this idea, and it's a little different because often I feel like I process through poetry, and not explicitly the visual art, though I do a lot of visual art, is like visual art is a big part of my art and creative side. But there's almost a way in which it's almost like you have a stepping stone and you get to actually put it down, you get to like put it down now, and it's part of your path to continue proceeding forward. And I think that's something that I wonder on, like almost like a very, I don't know, like psychosomatic, like the connection between the psyche and the body and the mind, the physical, where it's almost that's why art therapy can almost be more therapeutic, because you're actually, in a sense, you are creating something that you can put down, you can see outside of yourself, because you're literally like doing your drawing and then you're looking at it, where do you go to look at your words? Like in the words that you express in terms of a therapy, where do you go to look at that? There's nowhere to do. So now maybe if there's like journaling, I don't know, was journaling ever a part of like talking therapy? If I can ask you, I'm curious if that was, or was it just talking, just kept in the talking place?
No, my experience, because by the way, at one point I was doing both art therapy and talk therapy because I didn't want to despair. That's the thing. I was very antagonistic with that, but I was still like, I will do whatever it takes at that point. So I
Yeah,
was
you're like,
willing to go.
perfect. Like, I'll
I
do it
did
all.
both. No, the answer was it was straight talking. There was no, at least the one of the therapists I worked with that was talk therapy. It was just talking. But I do know other individuals who are in talk therapy. They would have homeworks, and some of them would be journaling, for example.
Yeah, I could see how journaling might be a little bit more beneficial, but it could end up still being like, I don't know, I mean, not that there's anything necessarily wrong with like being repetitive. Obviously, like I said, I process a lot through poetry, but I feel like the thing about poetry that's a bit different is like you're starting to use like visualizations of words or metaphors, or wordplay is a big thing for me, and you're putting it into the poem itself. So there is something, and also like I think what I love about doing that, or art therapy in general, is like it's something that is so helpful and healing for yourself, but then also other people can actually connect with it. Like I always think about that too. I'm like, I if I can share this, maybe it's a way in which somebody else can feel like, oh, I resonate with that. Or even if they're like, maybe they don't get exactly what's going on in terms of what I'm trying to express in the poem or work through in the poem. Maybe they find a cool wordplay, or like maybe they see something like some imagery they can kind of take with them or something like that. So anyways, I mean, I don't know. I mean, often art therapy though is usually kind of kept for yourself. Like you're not necessarily, I don't know, I'd be kind of curious. Like, has anyone ever done art therapy and then like did an exhibition of their pieces, because I think it sounds like art therapy usually it's fairly it's for your own growth and development, so that you can be better in your actual real life relationships and your relationship to yourself. So yeah, I mean, I guess what I mean to say is like, it's not like maybe likely necessarily that people are going to be seeing the art you do within art therapy, but it's interesting because I feel like any type of doing art anyways is always, how do I put this? Even if you're not doing it explicitly for therapy, it's still therapeutic. There's just something, there's something very therapeutic about taking the time to express and put it somewhere, in something that, again, you can like put down and refer back to, because again, it's like an artifact. It ends up being like your own history. And so you can kind of, when on your lesser days or the days where you're feeling just like you can't, you're having a hard time remembering what you can kind of go back to whether it's your art or your poems, and you're like, right, okay, I have been able to get through this. I can get through it again, sort of thing, you know? So anyways, I just think that I really, just to go back, I've strayed a bit from it, but just the idea of the artifact, the ability to make something that you can actually see, you can hold, and then you can put down. I think there's some connection there psychosomatically, where I think that's why maybe art therapy is even more beneficial. Like, or at least from your experience, it was more that one of the most helpful therapies that you experienced, right?
Yeah.
Or I don't know, it sounds like it was really beneficial and you preferred it over some of the other therapies.
Yeah, no, and by the way, to point out what you're saying, the distinction between basically journaling and poetry is exactly what you're saying. Metaphor, the power of metaphor, right? Because metaphor is not, it's not just, it's implicit builded meaning, right? That is not, that actually connects content with emotion. They're merged together into one package, right? And done well, creates powerful imagery that just journaling alone will never do, because it's just, if it's just an explicit documentation, that's not the same as, it's also a very passive mode. I think also the big difference too is a difference between a passive versus active position. So when you're using metaphor, imagery, depiction in language or an image making, that's a proactive act of you doing it with creativity versus just passive documentation. There is a difference, in my opinion.
That's a good point.
And by the way, actually, the big note, the real value, in my opinion, of the external documentation, you're absolutely correct that in general, too, also we found in studies of cognition, really the advanced thought of human beings that we do in society today relies on externalization. Great thinkers, academics, writers, things like that, they don't think just in their head. They must externalize it. So when they're doing, there's a lot of times where they will read text, they'll have journals next to them, and their journaling, their writing is externalizing their thoughts. And then they take those thoughts later and then restructure it to become a new, basically reorganized so that someone external from them can understand it, right? So this is very much parallel to what you're talking about, that a lot of times the art therapy may start as an individual tool and then can be used as an instrument to then bridge understanding with other people. It is possible. And especially when metaphoric modes are used in the composition. But the other point, I want to point out, actually, I'll share you a story. So one of the pieces I made, I actually left with the art therapist at the time in her studio. And it so happened the way she positioned it, when people were sitting, they could see the top half of the work, but not the bottom half. And people were, remember, this is the thing I made for myself with a very specific metaphorical meaning. And actually what I'll do is, again, like as I said off the record, I'm going to splice in, I'm going to in post, add in the image, but only the top half first to explain this is what my therapist explained later to me. People would see, go, oh, that's so beautiful. How powerful that is. How angelic. And then they stand up and actually see the whole painting. They're like, oh, and then they have like this horror moment. It was a very powerful image. So now he'll post up what the whole thing was. But the other thing to point out that just so point, like this thing actually did have a lot of power, right? Because it was very powerful imagery that people were able to connect to, even though it was very individual, very much a very particular meaning and reference to me personally. But with that said, I'll tell you what, in the beginning, the real power of the art therapy in externalizing was my therapist would systematically point out what was absent. So when things is made external and material, you can look at it and then ask questions, not just what's here, what's absent. And that was a lot of the interrogation of the image, which also, by the way, is a lot easier. It's a lot easier, especially when you're trained in the arts. You get trained to depersonalize from the object you're making. So you can actually enter into critique of discourse with it, both what's successful and not successful, but in this case, asking what's there and what's not there. And that's what the dialogue with that's also the thing too. Also, the therapist is not an interrogator on you. It's an interrogator with you on the image that was made. And that was the one of the most powerful. And again, I'll be splicing in imagery about now what was done. One was, for example, some of them were prompts that I made images responding to prompts. So one of them was depict your family as a garden. That'd be one. Or another one was depict a bird's nest. Just completely as random, right? You have no clue what that means. You just make a bird. You're like, okay, I made a birdhouse. Like you make a nest. So that one in particular, I'll say with the nest one, the therapist pointed out when I showed her it, she was like, Thomas, do you notice where's your bird's nest? It was in this abstracted like, like a still life, like an abstracted block, like an abstracted space of void, basically, with a horizon line, basically. She's like, where are bird nests usually? I was like, trees or branch houses or something like that. I was like, do you notice that yours is not in those? Like, yeah. I was like, oh, right. I didn't even notice that. And then she said, well, and by the way, what's in a bird's nest? I was like, birds, either the chicks or the eggs or the mother. It's like, do you notice that none of that in your thing? None of them are there. I was like, oh. Again, I just by answering the prompt, I made these images, but then I had none of these significations. It was only the therapist pointing them out. And then she led to the conclusion of, Thomas, by the way, do you want to know why you were asked to make a bird's nest? Like, what's the purpose of the prompt? I was like, yeah, I guess now I made it. It'd be nice to know what was up with this. It was maternal bonding. It was your relationship with your mother. That was basically the purpose of it. So that was a very powerful. And then tied with that was then the make a family, depict your family as a garden. First of all, it was noted it was 3 trees and there were pots, and they were basically pots separated from each other. And just to give you context, the therapist, because in the intake session, she asked about my family history and all those other things. She's like, wait a minute, I noticed you have 3 plants that are like trees, but you're a family of 4. You have an older brother. Where's your brother? My brother was, again, absent. It's again, the significations of the absence was this, the power of this imagery. It allows for this kind of signifying understanding by what's absent. One other note, this is the moment I kind of gave chills both to the therapist and me. The one that was depicting my father was one side of the tree had leaves. The other tree was bare. And she looked at me and she's like, Thomas, this one is your father, right? And I was like, yes. Your father had a stroke. Which side was the one that was paralyzed? The right side. I said, oh, the right side. Thomas, do you notice which side of the tree for your father does not have leaves? The right side. Of course, I never did that intentionally. Like that's the moment we were looking at each other and we look at the image and we're like, what the?
Wow.
That was a very powerful moment because again, these are the implicit embedded understandings that when one is not aware of, when you answer the call, how would this be manifested through language? How could it? It could only be done both from a very deep understanding of me and it having basically a kind of presence, a kind of reference, and then noticing the absences and that meaning derived from that.
That's so interesting. Oh my word. I bet that it was a really crazy moment for you and the therapist. It makes me think too of your project on lack, Thomas, because it's like it's the negative space too, right? Like negative space is a big thing in like art and but there's like it's the absences, not just what's there, that tells you something about what's inside your heart, in your own experience and your own understanding of self or a family or of nurturing, all of that. And so, but it's funny because you have to make something to see the you have to make something there, put something there to have the absence, and so there's something of a presence in the absence, as I guess I want to say. There's something of there's something present in the absence. There's something, because what it's showing you, and even that word's kind of interesting because there's a present in as in a gift to show you some type of understanding, even in the absence, So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, the presence of the absence, or the present of the absence, and therefore kind of giving a further insight into your own self and your own understanding of, your experience and the way you view or have an orientation towards things like family or nurture. Would the therapist talk more extensively with you about after with asking those questions, like what's absent, like, which would the therapist, I'm not sure if it was he or she, would they go deeper into things with you, or did they kind of leave it available to, like, if you wanted to talk more about whatever it was, or was it just like you said, was it kind of just very simple, like, I mean, not that that's simple, there's a huge profundity to it, but
Yeah,
did
yeah.
they kind of leave it open-ended in terms of interpretation of that absence?
Now, so that's the thing. So this was the beginning. This was the initial prompts of work to come to basically in my intake session,
Okay.
basically. So what eventually happened was basically through other imagery. There was actually specifically one related to time in particular. So I think probably the most likely, I'm speaking for the therapist. She's not here to talk for me or talk what she was noticing. She noticed that I had a very strong anxiety with time with me, and we had prompts related to it. So I basically drew these two representations of clouds, and she started noticing, basically what she noticed was that I had this model of orientation towards time, and she asked me to depict that. She asked me, show me a depiction of clouds during rest and during, as I had to be able to language in the sense of execution. So when you're executing versus resting, and those clouds, there was depictions and meanings that drew from that. So I'll show that image as opposed in postscript. But then from that, what she's doing is basically she kind of was getting a lay of the land and then sensing where's the area of the strongest emotional energy and darkness, not darkness in a negative sense, but there's more like of something of not understanding, that there's a kind of lack of understanding occurring with a lot of emotional energy, in which and I think very intuitive, very well, she picked up this execution. This is actually most powerful. This is what literally was a big breakthrough. Was she said, Thomas, I want you to do me one of the weeks when this language of execution. She asked me, who is the execution? Who is the executioner? She personified for me. And then that was my prompt. So I basically sat there, and for the week, and I felt it. Trust me, like when this happens and done right, this raw emotion is cutting through your body. You have to it actually draws out a very, for me, a very distinct feeling of rage. Actually,
Wow.
it was very powerful. I remember this. And it led to the depiction that basically, that when I said before, that story of the painting that was left with the therapist that people saw half and was like, oh my God, that's so powerful, like an angel. And then the other half was like, oh, what a horrible, like in shock, like an awness was occurred in people. It was this depiction, I would say out loud what it is and show the imagery. We see basically a trifectum we see this like quasi angelic object meet in absence of the space, in a space of deep blue greens. There's a body of water, this angelic entity in a kind of crucifix-like position, made at a very sharp negative space. It's like basically was made out of masking tape, using masking tape to mask the painting space, and did layers of dark colors around it. So when you take off the masking tape, you have very sharp edges, depicting an absence, this angelic object, basically person, entity, over with a halo-esque item above the head, over this naked man crying with his arms cut off, basically bloodied, over standing on top of an eye in a body in an ocean of water, crying. So that's, I mean, I'm depicting out loud what was depicted. And then actually, as I was sitting, then I developed it, and I sat there talking, basically not talking to it per se, but like standing with it. And I sat there like, no, the executioner or the execution. I felt like, no, that's not the name. Because remember, it was personification, right? And a person has a name. So I'm looking at this, and also the interest is it was not one person, it was actually trifectum. It was like three persons as one. It's kind of a weird quasi-religious Christian mode a little bit going on right there. But either way, I was like, no, this is not execution, but it is, but in the way that, for example, right now, I'm the speaker and you're, Michelle, the listener. These are names we could assign to ourselves, but they're names in activity. They're not who we really are. Our pronouns are like basically our real name is proper noun names is Thomas and Michelle, for example, not the listener and the speaker. So you'd be true to say that I am the speaker right now and you're the listener. Those are true, but that's not it's correct. It's not the truth, not
Yeah.
really the substance of the statement, really. So I'm looking at like, yes, it is the execution, but it's also, and then I looked deep inside and looked, what was the name? What is the name of this person?
Mm.
Love. That was the answer I came to. And I was like, oh no. So that's the answer to your question about where the therapist comes in. Again, I'm not the therapist, but I'm the one who went through it. So I could just speak from observance from what was going on from the looking back on it. I think she was looking for what is the pressure point? What is for what the reasons I'm in that space with her for? What is the thing of the ultimate pressure, of the most darkest misunderstanding, unknowingness that needs imagery depicted to show? And personification is really a mode of metaphor that was allowed this to erupt out and led to obviously a lot of like huge discourse around that and understanding that I didn't even know was there in that moment. And then actually there were things after that, by the way, too. But I'll stop right there because I gave you a lot to answer that question.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I loved it all. Thank you so much for sharing. I when you were having that moment of like, this is execution, but there's some that's not the right. And then you like had this moment of like love. Can I just were you like with the therapist when that happened, or were you?
No, that was
No.
privately, but I did share that when I showed it to her and explained it, I explained that point.
Okay, so then you came back and you like explained everything, and okay, that's interesting because it feels what I really appreciate about this kind of idea is like there's something that seems very it feels like art therapy is really giving you a lot of space to it's almost like it gives you the nudges to just kind of to come to terms or to release or to let go or to express or to paint and then understand for yourself in a sense like which is good because sometimes I wonder if the risk sometimes that maybe there could be something that's almost like how do I put this prescribing like what you should be feeling or this is this but it feels like art therapy leaves a really amazing room for you to come to terms for yourself on what is being expressed in the experience of it and
Mhm.
I mean do you think like that idea of just because I'm thinking okay if you get a prompt is it like hard to not because I don't know this is something I struggle with personally with making art and maybe just in general with like I don't know accepting some of the things about myself or something but it's like to be able to just allow yourself to go and just make whatever it is sometimes there's such a part of me that's like okay so this is like okay I don't know it's almost like you're doing it because you're expecting the therapist to give you some sort of answer like some sort of sense of this is what they want to see and so I'm going to make it to be what they want to see which I know
No,
obviously the whole like dynamic of art therapy is probably to like shatter that and not do that at all and I'm sure that art therapists are really trained to make sure that people are in a place of like this like allow them to be in the free flow where they can just express whatever it is that they maybe subconsciously don't know they are expressing but suddenly it comes out in their work but did you feel any tension with that when you got prompts Thomas?
No, but that's my point. Absolutely not. No, because that's the thing. Like I was here in a like, here's the thing. Like I was interested in the truth. Like
Yeah.
that's the end all be all. So
Yeah.
thus for me, the prompts were, I'm just going to go. I was in full commitment mode. So there was no like self-editing to be concerned what another person thought about it per se. And by the way, like, sometimes what did happen would be they would kind of put on hats. Like they would offer interpretations. Like, how do you feel about this interpretation? And you're the judger of it. You're like,
Yeah.
no, because that's the thing. It's like, no, that's not that hat. No, this hat feels more appropriate. This hat fits better for what's being depicted here. But they do sometimes prompt, right? The prompt is not just the initiation of the art, but also potential interpretations, especially if you're struggling to find them. I do find that's variable too. I had two art therapists. One was a little bit more willing to give proactive propositions of interpretation, but never with any strong force, in my opinion. The second one was much less, so even less so, I would say. So that's a little more individuated. Some therapists will be a little more stronger in offering potential interpretations than others, but not very often. And either way, that certainly was not. I did not go in there with any fear of some censorship or what they're going to think about me, Because I think because at this, this is really important. I think art therapy, if you're going to go into therapy in general, but especially art therapy, you've got to come in there with very clear intentions of why you're there. And basically saying like, something is up, I'm responsible, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to come to the answer. Like that was my position. So those kind of concerns were not really relevant to me at the point.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. That's wonderful to hear more about. And on, did you have one preference over the other for an art therapist who was kind of like willing to kind of give propositions of interpretations or not? Was there one that you preferred? I mean, it sounds like you probably had a, I don't know, maybe in a sense you could kind of, I feel like most people with their dreams, for example, like, because this is funny, all the time we're talking, Thomas, I'm thinking about dreams, because I'm thinking about how much dreams are like these visual things that you're not in this kind of like almost self-conscious state of like because this is what I think I can feel sometimes, or especially in the earlier days of making art and poetry and writing and stuff. It's like such a self-consciousness of like, what am I saying? How do I make it a poem and stuff like that? But then you start to get away from that and you're just like, I don't care. I'm not thinking about that. I'm not worrying about what other people will think of this. I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to go where this kind of compelling leads me to go in terms of making something. But it's just kind of like this idea that, when it comes to the hold up on doing that, like when you have an intuition, I guess I want to say with dreams, you often have a dream and you're like, okay, I have some ideas of what that could have meant. I have some ideas of what that could be signifying. So I don't know, it sounds like for you personally, at least, you have that sense already. So I wonder, maybe for some people, did you have a preference, like the one art therapist who maybe offered more propositions or the one who didn't? Did you have a preference between the two?
Well, first of all, anything about dreams, I mean, Carl Jung had a huge thing about basically he would have the dreams, and his red book was in documenting those dreams, for example. So this is, I think, a very reasonable point about dreams, right?
Yeah.
Being, I think that's where actually very important to document them, right? Dreams that are not, this is where, again, it's just kind of effervescent if it's not materialized in some way. And Carl Jung, by the way, in the red book actually made paintings, like he made imagery of the dreams too.
That's so cool. Yeah.
As well. So I think that's a perfectly reasonable modality about it. Again, I'm just hearing from what you're saying, my experience of it. Now the personal preference of interpretation, like assistance in interpretation, I think it depends, to be honest. Actually, that was less the issue. Personally, actually a more relevant issue, just in terms of modality, the differences was that some art therapists will permit you to do the imagery independently during the week. Others strongly prefer you do it in session. And actually, I understand why, because the amount of emotions when you actually are tapping into it can be extreme. And if they're not contained in a safe way, can explode on you in an extremely dangerous, I don't mean dangerous in the sense of like harming way, but just these things need to be managed. So
Yeah.
It's not like people think like, oh, you're just drawing pictures. Like it's just like this kind of like kiddish thing. But the answer is like, no, you're actually, when this gets to the real core wounds and traumas of human existence that are being now drawn up, that don't get to just be sublimated down. This is extremely powerful stuff that can cause very strong distress at the minimum, or can cause extreme outbursts in other scenarios. I mean, at least the minimums would be crying, yelling, things like that. Or especially if there's other people involved, like parental dynamics can cause very extreme conflicts. And it does. And I don't think anyone going to therapy should be very clear. The probability that you're going to end up with some need for conflict resolution with other people is probably pretty high, most likely. But that's the thing. So when you're doing this, you got to be really willing to go all the way through. You can't go half step in, because we're not playing games here. We're dealing with some of the most core fundamental understandings in your mental models in your mind and how you understand the world. And when those get challenged or those get intervened on, that's a very extreme moment of potential transformation. But just like any transformation, it's going to can be very high pressure, very pressurized, very intense, and potentially very painful if not managed properly. So the real dichotomy is really, I would actually advise people interested in this is I think you have to be very serious about the question of doing the art therapy, the modalities, would they do this inside the session or outside the session? I'm mixed. I actually think I can make arguments both sides. I think it is a case by case basis, because
Yeah.
sometimes you do need the time of deliberation. Because also depends on, a big thing too is also in art therapy, the material used actually matters a lot, because it is, and actually it's fascinating. I got curious after my treatment was complete. I looked in the books about it, and there is like hierarchies of materials: pencil versus color pencil versus crayon versus charcoal versus Conte crayon versus pastels versus watercolor versus oil paints. And their main difference of there is pressure, like intensity, time, and time duration, right? Because some things require more planning and require more systematic approaches. Others are much more rapid and quick. Those modalities are things actually art therapists will use intentionally. They'll have you make images in certain mediums because they want you to, at a certain degree, it's an interface of the emotional state as well. So it's not even just the imagery and the metaphorical meaning; it's in the materiality of the image of the things you're using to make your images too. I will comment that it was a factor, a strategy that the therapists are taking into consideration as well.
Wow, that's so interesting. Thank you for being willing to entertain my very specific, like practical, questions on art therapy. I just sometimes I'm like visualizing it and I'm kind of like just seeing it in my head. And so it's interesting for me to think about more of the details of how it practically plays out. Like, what is therapy actually like, and how are they talking, how are they engaging with you as a therapist? So something you said, Thomas, made me think of another word connection, because you said something about like the emotions that it can draw up. But I there seems to be like this almost interesting way in which the word itself about drawing is actually connected to what you are doing on a psychological level, right? You're doing something physical that then draws up your emotions. It draws out your possibly even like repressed or things you just never are willing or maybe want to face or can't face or don't know how to face or something like that. I feel like there's something interesting there in actually drawing something that you're drawing it out of yourself and are able to put it before yourself, and therefore maybe even be able to face it and work through it. So I think that's something really interesting, even just in the word connection there. And I wonder, when it came to these like emotions, like, just, was that surprising for you? Like, that you're like, oh my gosh, like you're doing this, whatever that is, if we can call it an assignment or, attending to a prompt, would it feel like suddenly you're like, wow, why am I feeling this way? Were you surprised to feel the intensity of emotion you did when fulfilling and completing some of these assignments?
It wasn't, I mean, if anything, it just confirmed something I always knew, which is human beings are not very trustworthy, in the sense that like all this stuff is there, but you didn't think it was there, but it's actually there. So it actually is a very humbling episode of epistemology perspective, in the sense that, oh, and actually I wrote this in the essay, by the way, about the, figures of trauma, that, oh, actually a lot of our problems in relationships is that we're actually not even interfacing with the person in front of us. We're dealing with a figure that's not them, that by their proximity of similarity, we think there's someone else, there's something else. And we're not even mediating, we're not even in a relationship with them. We're in a relationship with this trauma pattern between us instead. So it's actually like, it very much, it was this realization about all these points, like, oh, so if I actually want to have a relationship with the truth, to actually be connected to reality, I have to work through these traumas, right? These patterns. And by the way, like that's a big thing too. It's like, a lot of times it's easier not to do it. It's so much easier not to live in ignorance, right? This is a demand onto oneself that should not be taken lightly. And I mean, if anything, I kind of knew by the magnitude, by like, I wanted to solve this. It's not like you're going to solve the problem of existence. I'm not going to do that, but I knew something was up where I'm not getting something I value and want in my life. And I'm taking responsibility. I think that's kind of the big thing too, is that like, I think the big difference, it's not that I'm shocked to have emotions for human beings. I'm shocked how much it was so embedded. It's so embodied that I don't even get a choice. You don't even have a choice in the matter. You don't, it's there. Whether you can acknowledge or not acknowledge, it doesn't matter. It's still there. It's still going to come through regardless. So, and if you, especially if you don't acknowledge it, it will skew you one way or the other. So a lot of responses of anxiety or depression or anything like that, or just, or manifest psychosomatic representations of these underlying tensions inside you.
So good. So good. I'm like, why did I bring my pen? Like, I'm like, I want to write something down. Okay. I'll grab a pen.
Well, it's recorded. So you can always listen to it later.
That's true. I can just come back and be like, that part, right? Now I'll write it down. But yeah, no, I think that's so good. That's so good, Thomas, what you said. And an image came to mind while you were speaking and referring back to your essay, which I hope everyone goes and reads it's on your Medium, right? Is that right,
Yeah,
Thomas?
that's right.
Okay. Yeah. But it's like this idea of the projection that we do, and this inability to even engage with another real human being that's in front of us. It almost made me think of like the fact that, with projection of things that we don't even realize are there. It's almost like we have this film. There's a film in like over here, can't see it, it's inside. But then like we have this projector, which is like our, how we literally just our perception and our thinking with this other person that we're engaging with. But literally it's just like what's happening is just like a project, like it's almost like they become a screen for that projection, right? And they just, there it is. It's just, that's what's happened. That's what you're really engaging with. But because of not, like you're saying, not recognizing it, you think that what you're seeing is the other person. So I think that's where a lot of the sometimes troubles in relationships is like it ends up just being about like, well, it's can be a lot about blaming. Like it's just them, like something's just wrong with them or something's just wrong with me, like it's like there's kind of this ability to just sort of think something's just wrong when it's like, there's actually just this film right here that you're not picking up on. That's what it is. And it's built up from a lot of your past experiences, literally like just habits or things you just were never really aware of. And it's there now. And so it's not so much about like, I do think that there's something about every human that in some ways is how do I put this? There's imperfection in every human, of course, but the thing is that if we don't understand some of the patterns of what we're doing or thinking, where it's coming from, then we don't really know where to look to know how to fix those things that are problematic, that we maybe would like to, like you're saying, you identified, like, I'm not being maybe who I want to be, or I'm not doing some of the things I want to be doing. But I'm doing something different. Where's that coming from? Right. And instead of it just being like, well, I think there can be a very defeated spirit where like, I'm just completely a failure, right? Or that person's just completely a failure. It's like, well, there's actually this like loop going on, this film that's going through this projector. Why don't you go ahead and look at what that film is? And I think what's cool about going to the art therapy is like, now you just accept that. And here's your, projection screen. A projection screen should be clear, like blank, right? Like that's why the blank canvas, you start there. You don't start on another human being. You start on the blank canvas and you just let yourself project there and see actually what is on this film. Otherwise it's very hard to discern, is that them or is that me, in relationships.
Yeah. So, and by the way, actually to build on that, a lot of times I think I find in people who go to therapy, what they end up getting? A bunch of theories. They actually just stack on mental model theories, narcissism, psychopathy, and then they map all of reality to these fucking models. Sorry for the cursing, but it's just like, no. So it's actually the opposite. It's the opposite of what ideally I would argue the purpose of these interventions or procedures are. They're meant to draw out these figures of distortion that are in your head. Yeah. By no fault of your own, by the way. Almost 99% of the time, not your own fault. You can almost make an argument. It's almost like this. You can almost make the argument. This is like a metaphorical for original sin, in the sense that it's something that you never were responsible for. It was done to you. That you are not the cause of, but you are responsible for it, because you have to basically clear out. If you want actually a deeper, truer connection to reality and other people, you need to draw out this basically illusion, this illusionary figure, and come to peace and resolution with it, and transform oneself related to it. That's the exact opposite of going into therapy, coming out with a bunch of mental models of narcissism, psychopathy, and patriarchy, misogyny. Like, these are all just mental models, and now you're stuck just projecting more models onto reality nonstop. So that's exactly, so actually that's why art therapy, I'm such a champion of it, because it's such a completely opposite mode
I
of
love.
treatment. And by the way, and also think too, also, I think it really is your orientation towards it of a passive versus active relationship. Because for example, like the execution known as love, right? As named love, that the image, when after the times of reflecting on it, the art therapist then prompt me looking at the figure, the second man, the one with the arms cut off, amputated off, crying, asked the next prompt was, what happens if that man stands? Because he was basically, he was like in a kneeled position. She asked, what happens if he stands? And then see, that's the thing, that's just so powerful. It's almost like in fiction, right? In the sense that we have characters, when they're really developed characters, a good writer will actually, it almost will write itself, because the character will then have a momentum of movement. And when the question is, what does the character do next? Or what happens if the character is put in this act, does this next act? The narrative writes itself and moves on its own momentum. Almost, that's my interpretation of what I think good fiction writers would do with characters if it's a good, well-written piece. And that's when, and what happened was, and now I'll post at it in the image. I'll say it out loud to you so you can understand, Michelle. It zooms in on the man. He's older now. He actually has a beard. It's obviously much more associated to me. He's naked still, but he stands. And in the absence, his arm, so as he stands, and so basically when you're standing, his arm, like in the absence, I did a negative space, his hands are like this. So it's in a prayer position, like hands up prayer position, but they're not there. They're still in absence. So you can still, but you can see the amputated arms behind, but in the negative space, the way I rendered it, you see the hands. So they're basically being generated, basically, but this man standing up. So that has a very powerful, again, very powerful image. Even though this man is wounded and is lacking, he can still come to, by taking a proactive stance of being from kneel to standing, he can come to peace or come to articulate what was lost.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. Wow, that's really good. With that, was that something you did? Was that a second drawing? Like was
second painting? Yeah.
Okay, second painting. Okay. What medium were you working in for this particular painting?
What was it? It was oil. I mean, it was acrylics.
Acrylics. Okay. Were these like largest? Could you make them any size you wanted to?
Yeah, any size you wanted to. Yes. Actually, surprisingly, that was a modality too. They would note, like, for example, my second art therapist restricted me to only a notebook size, basically this big, more or less like this big. Apparently size does affect the emotional intensity. So the bigger you make it, the more intense the reaction is.
Wow.
That's another interesting modality they regulate too.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I was thinking too a little bit more about like what you said. Like, I think that's so good and so true about the theories, and you should just see the world through this way. Like, it's like you're getting help, but you're kind of getting more burdened almost, and just getting all these other theories on theories on theories that then you should see the world this way. And that reminds me a little bit of just anyways, I was listening to the Even Arabi like book club, when just the idea of like this idea came up with between you and Javier about the ability to, like, if you want to see something, you're going to start to see something, or if you're told to sort of see things a certain way, you're going to start to see that everywhere. And that the problem with that is that you almost aren't able to see yourself, or sometimes see what is actually going on in terms of what is really going on around me. I mean, I guess we'll always see something through a certain lens, but like you said, I think it's that clearing out that actually that art therapy seems to be very helpful for, is the ability to actually allow the clearing, so that you can start to have like a clarity of mind and a clarity of being in touch with reality itself, and not just with theories, right? Like, and I mean, the thing is too, then theories become kind of like veils to reality, and so I know I really like the idea of the clearing out, and how it's in a way I feel like you get more in touch. It's almost like you're able to clear that out to be able to be in greater touch with your own sense of self. And be able to also recognize, like, I thought that was such a great point too, about this idea of something you have to take responsibility for. That's not really your fault, but yet you don't become like in a victimhood mindset. You don't start to have a victimhood mindset about it. You start to be like, okay, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to do what I can to take responsibility. And that's what I was going to say before, is like, there is this idea of it does remind me of original sin, the idea of this like brokenness. But at the same time, what's amazing is that you actually are very functioning. Like, even the fact of projecting is like, you have a functioning projector. So it's not that it's so much about it being broken. It's about what is going through the projector. It's what is that? What is the content of that? And I think that sometimes maybe we feel like we shouldn't look at that, because it's like, well, I don't know, maybe there's a sense of just whatever is projecting is what it is. It should be, that is reality, but it's there. Maybe there's this in touchness with the idea of, you actually need to be able to clear things out to have a clearer vision for what is reality, and how to actually see a person clearly, not just for the things you're plastering on them, but just to be able to see them for who they are, and for them to be able to see you for who you are, and for you to be able to see yourself, without the coloring, I suppose we could say, of this film that I keep talking about, like the film that's in the projector, and anyways, I just think that's a really incredible tension to hold, that it's not your fault, but you're taking responsibility. But I think it's such an important place to get to for real change and progress, or like real, and like you said, it's not like you're gonna like fix existence, but we do have to learn how to like live in it and do the best we can in it. And in a sense, sort of learn ways to manage the things that sort of build up on these films, that then we can have these processes of like clearing out again, to be able to kind of just get back to almost like a place where, like, I think of children a lot, the childlike wonder, the childlike, where there isn't so much built up just yet, or all these types of different conditionings, or these theories. It's just like, they're just engaging with the world, it's this very kind of there's a place of curiosity, and seeing things for the first time again, seeing things without it being tainted by whatever this film is that's there. It kind of makes me wonder too, Thomas, like after having this experience of art therapy, do you still just on your own sort of do practices to keep that up, in a sense, like in terms of just kind of clearing out, or do you feel like when you do a really good, thorough, therapy session, you kind of just deal with it, you get to some of the main root things that were on this film that you have running through yourself and your mind, that then it's kind of like, you've made a really big, huge, giant leap in terms of getting beyond that or something, or having a better sense of understanding. So then I don't know, like, it's not something you really have to do necessarily again, or I don't know, maybe you could just start to do other methods of the clearing out. But I'm curious if you still happen to do art as a mode of this type of therapeutic practice.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay.
I think of it, it's basically mental hygiene, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that sometimes you got to do a deep clean, right? The seasonal deep cleans. Other times you got to do a little quick, mop the floor, quick swipe on the countertop just to keep things up maintenance. Yeah, I mean, I will comment what's happened over time is that there's been more and more language added in with the visuals. So I started with the very visual oriented ones. Now, especially because I'm not in sessions with a therapist at the moment. What I do is basically I write and then draw image next to it. So basically it's like a notebook style like this. On one side it's the text, one side it's text, one side is image. Sometimes the image is first and I respond to it. Other times I write first, then the image. It depends on what I feel more present at the time. But in general, yeah, it's a cultivated habit to to do this, right? And actually a lot of times too, also then I do a lot of prayer too. So my prayers are in this mode too, as well.
That's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing on that. Do you feel like for people, how I don't want to circle back this too much because this wasn't your experience, so I don't want to, but I wonder, how you said like you weren't really hindered by anything in terms of what this should be, or you're like, I'm just going to go like full throttle, just completely like dive headfirst into this and just go wherever this leads me in terms of what I'm actually painting, drawing, etc. Do you feel like art therapy could still be good for somebody who struggles with the whole self-consciousness? Like, do you think that it could still be like, I I mean, maybe a therapist could kind of work through with the person if they're feeling so hung up. Because I just think like there's a lot of, I think a lot of times people don't create because they're like, well, what's the point? What's it for? I'm not talking about doing art therapy, but just as art is a therapeutic practice in general, just the idea
Mhm.
of like, oh, I've got an idea, and just usually just kind of dismissing it and keeping it in the ephemeral, right? It's just an idea, or it was just a dream, or it was just, there's a lot of that happens because people are like, well, I'm not an artist, or,
Yeah.
what
No,
is it for?
that's
Like, I'm not going to make money with this, or it's not like I'm not, oh, that's like I have other things I should be doing. And don't get me wrong, there are responsibilities we all have to do. But sometimes I think like this mental hygiene area, there's oh gosh, there's this this quote, I think her name is like Maria von Franz or something like that. She talks about how like a lot of basically like there's a lot of psychological um issues, honestly, just things that really like people then end up struggling with just because they didn't like express their art. They didn't express themselves in some way
mhm.
or another. And it's almost like, wow, I wonder if we could just talk about this practice of mental hygiene through art, and just really kind of hold space for it as an option for just like the everyday person. Like this is something that anyone could do to just keep up their mental hygiene, and sort of realize like, oh, there's actually something that is healing about this, and gives a place for your own mind to put it somewhere, because otherwise it just ends up being here.
Mhm.
It's like perpetual hamster wheel of thoughts, and so I don't know, just maybe if you want to speak on that. Like, I guess the original question was, do you think it could still be helpful for people who have severe inhibitions with ever expressing themselves? And then like, what do you think? Do you think this would be like a good thing for people just to do in general? Like,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
that's the thing. I mean, I know definitely in the intake sessions, like when they're evaluating you for art therapy, it goes two ways. Yes, I think basically one is they actually usually they turn away artists because they have that model, like this needs to be a certain thing. So
Mhm.
generally, a lot of time art therapists will not accept artists because of that mental model. They had presupposition inside their head what art is and what their relationship to it is. It's very depersonalized, right? And it's very much just a thing that needs to be a certain standard, and that's what they do. So
Right.
they can't engage, they cannot enter the space of art making for this emotional body, right? The emotional figure inside them. Then the other side, probably, again, I'm not an art therapist, so I'm just telling you what I would think would be the
Yeah.
case.
Yeah.
They would probably say, yeah, if you're like severe inhibition, subconscious inhibition, I would imagine most of them would probably they would assess if it could be managed or addressed, and probably I would imagine probably start with very simple things that
Yeah. I was thinking too.
are not very intensive, right? And then they kind of scale up the intensity. Uh, because I do remember a lot of times people talking about, usually people don't want to consider art therapy because they don't think they're artists, so therefore they can't do it. But that probably the main thing is no, you can. In fact, it's all about just using nonverbal meaning significance. That's probably the major idea here, is that use nonverbal meaning signifying, right? So you don't have to use language or theories to communicate what you're trying to say. You can use color, texture, image, material to do so instead.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point about the nonverbal. And I wonder, like, I feel like we do get hung up on verbalization as a means for processing and dealing with issues, or dealing with struggles or relational struggles. Like, it's funny because there's such an emphasis on like, well, just, communication is key. And I'm like, don't get me wrong, I, I get that. But the thing is that often people are like, one person speaking French, the other person speaking Chinese, out in like a
Yeah.
metaphorical, like they're speaking different languages. So just to communicate more is just more frustrating, So I think so that's often because, you're not really realizing, oh, right, we're speaking different languages. And then also those languages often come from, again, all these things that are just this, like, you don't even realize what's been built up over your life, and now you're still speaking from that place, but you don't know what language it is, but it's just not the other person's. I think if
Mhm.
both people are able to do that clearing out, you start to be able to build a new, like a synthesized language together that
Mhm.
puts people much more in the same place to be able to communicate. But it takes such an inner work. I wonder if, like, a lot of times the fear is just to face oneself in ever, like, I think the idea of and there's like this idea like, oh, well, journal or different ways of coping with things. But it's funny because I don't think I've ever, art therapy was something I heard about in like college,
Mm.
one, and two, it's not really ever, I don't know. I wonder if it could just be almost because the nonverbal cannot speak for itself. It cannot speak for itself, but there could be a verbal reminder or sort of suggestion of like, hey, sometimes it takes like non-rational or non-verbal places to deal with the things that you don't know how to articulate, like, and articulation's not even helping there, right, for these various other reasons I mentioned. So verbalization and communication is not necessarily going to help, but maybe the verbal could do something where like we could give more. I think that's why I wanted to talk about this too, actually, Thomas, is just because I would love for people to understand the healing power of the nonverbal therapies and just expressions and practices, and maintenances of the mind, right? Like, so it's almost like that there could be maybe a greater discussion just in general, or I don't know where it could happen in families and like schools, I don't know, but just to be able to say like there are nonverbal places to be able to deal with some of the things that you're processing that you don't even know how to give word to, and it
Mhm.
and it is in like trying to like let yourself draw it out of yourself by drawing, by being prompted and then expressing and then being able to see something in that you weren't able to see or understand just with words. um
Yep. Oh no.
I, I just would I like there's so much, like, unfortunately I feel like it gets such a bad rap from like a practical perspective, but yet like art is so there's something so practical about art because it ties us into the practice, and all of our practices are what make our lives. Like that's what forms our life, is like our practices and our habits. And often you like the beautiful thing about practice is there's a vulnerability but a power in that, because you realize like you're not perfect but you're going to keep trying. you know
Mhm.
just in the word practice itself. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I think I wonder. I guess I'm kind of just as like a thought experiment. Do you feel like this could have been something helpful for you when you were like a teenager or something? I don't know. Do you feel like it's? I mean, it's great that you were able to
Oh, yeah.
experience it when you did, but it's just like, do you feel like it could be something to recommend or like advise people at whatever younger ages even?
That's tough. I don't have much of a position on that, only because, I mean, I do think therapy because, like, I don't think, how about I put it this way? I think the decision to go into therapy should be intentional. Like, it should not be and I think you need to be taking self ownership of it. So, for example, like with children, unless the child makes the independent choice to want to do this, uh, I don't, because you know what is the thing is, I don't think I could imagine a scenario the parents put the kid in it and they're not invested. Thus, it's a waste of time. Like the big
Totally,
thing is,
totally. Yeah.
the core component is uh, self commitment to do
Mhm.
this because you believe that basically the mental hygiene, right?
Mhm.
Mental health, mental hygiene
Yeah.
of this procedure of drawing out these films,
Yeah.
these patterns, is something choice worthy that you believe matters and something you're willing to do what it takes to do.
Yeah.
Usually that only happens when your map of reality is not getting what you want.
Hmm.
That so therefore I find that tends to happen. I think if we were in other generations, other time periods, this would happen in people in their 20s, in their teens and 20s. So when they're trying to get married, I tend to find when you're going through a major life transition, like marriage and family, child raising, this would probably when this comes up. It just happens now. It happens in our 30s now on average, as opposed to the 20s or teens. So that's my personal opinion. That's all I can really say on
Yeah.
that. Nevertheless, what I do say is I think um, the power of emotional language, right, or emotion, or the depiction of the emotion by metaphor and imagery and icon is not. I actually think it is. It's it's not it's not rational, but it's rationalistic in the sense that it's intelligible and can be discoursed. And it's not just subjective preferences. Like the very fact that that the story of the painting that was left in my therapist's space, and it was an individual thing of me with a very particular meaning and significance, yet it had the power to draw the interest and awe and understanding of total strangers who have no idea about the context of that image and why it was made, the prompt and anything related, but yet it had such power. That's a bridge of understanding. That's, I think, a very powerful demonstration of intelligibility, right? That it meant that it was not just some subjective preference that's just my own little world that has no, and it's not a sophist kind of isolated mind by itself. It actually did have the power to be intelligible to other people. And this is just imagery, visual imagery. Language imagery does exactly the same thing. So much of human understanding between people is the metaphors we live by, and we use them all the time. It's just they're either so normalized that we don't take them for granted, or like that language of I'm drawing to draw out the emotion. Like it's a metaphor, right? Or presence or present, right? It's a play on word mode of it, but it's the same idea. We use it much more than we think. We just take it for granted. So it's very much like you said, kind of seeing the world with the eyes of a child in a way where you're not deadened by just mental norms and models of how the world is, but instead seeing fresh with a new fresh eye. I think that's probably the thing I would close with in terms of, if you're considering art therapy, take it as an opportunity to see the world with the eyes of a child. And then you're taking this really proactive stance of confronting oneself, your mental models of the world, and coming to a deeper understanding if you're willing to go through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so good, Thomas. That's so good. I would definitely, I mean, though I've never gone through art therapy personally, I'm like, wow, it sounds like something that probably most humans would benefit from. But like you said, if you're wanting to make that, and like basically if you're wanting to and willing and dedicated to that investment of like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to let it, I'm going to put the time in to allow this to do what it will through me, I guess the only reason why I brought up about like younger ages and stuff, I mean, I think you're right about it being a more serious, intentional decision. Absolutely. I just think about, to connect it back to children, I feel like it's just, it's like really when you're a child that you're just like drawing pictures and you have your little notebooks, and there's just so much more there's so much more allowance and just a sense of expressing and drawing and writing and like stuff like that. I just think about it with my own children, just drawing this. Can I get crayons? Mommy, can I get paper and stuff? And I just think I think what's beautiful with children is that they're not in the mindset of like, what is this for exactly? They have their own purposes. Like they I'm making letters for, Oma, or I'm doing this, they have their own little reasons. They'll talk to you about what they're doing, but they're not thinking like I think there can be this, and this came up with a conversation with Samuel Barnes and my twin sister, Mary-Lise, and I, there can be a cynicism in adulthood where you just kind of like, well, what's it for? And I think that's why why I really wanted to have this conversation too, is just to really give a space and a time to say, hey, there is a place for that just taking the time to express yourself in a way that's like just for the sake of the processing. And it's amazing that there is such a thing as art therapy that can really help people who are willing and ready to kind of take that step to be more intentional with it. And so I think that's great. I just think like, wow, I do sometimes wonder if people's relationships in general would just be better if like they all just took the time to just pick some type of art, like, whether it's clay, like, pottery. I'm talking like just really like just taking something that you're envisioning and making it a reality, like making it something you can hold, see, read, share. I don't know. I think there's just something there about like doing that then makes relationships so much, I don't know, so much richer. And maybe we're just more open. Like, I think, in terms of just how we relate to one another. And the only reason I bring this up is because, you had gone to art therapy because of things you're seeing, like some struggles, and just, when it's like, okay, something happening in a relationship that's troubling or not going the way, you have a conviction for it to go, or like you'd like to see it go, then it kind of puts us in crisis mode of like, what is going on? What do I need to work through here? And so anyways, I just think like, I really do hope that people can kind of see the richness and the beauty of just, non, uh, like there's almost like there's no purpose to it, but yet there's something so purposeful about it in just
Mhm.
allowing yourself to, even just scribble down some lines to make a poem from, or to do a drawing or a painting. Or, and I'm not saying that like everybody necessarily has to do these things. It's just that I mean, I think that there's something creative about every human, and the more you understand that agency of creation, you have a better, I feel like it puts you more in a place of being in touch with the fact that, oh right, I have the power actually to, and the responsibility to respond to this world I'm in, like
Mhm.
to be a part of creating the world I'm in, and the relationships I'm in, but not so much because I like fix everything and like fashion everything to my will and to what I want to see, but more so that I create my own, like, I create from my own place of this inner overflow, if that makes any sense, and allow that overflow to spill out and be available, and even be something that can be shared with other people, and then making other people realize like, oh, I have an overflow too. Like I'm not empty. I've got actually a wellspring within me. And it's like, to be able to tap into that well, and like allow it to come forth. And then I think there's just, I don't know, I think there's so much life and like, and place of abundance that people can experience in allowing that creative outlet, like in finding whatever that creative outlet is, that's, creates something that's just, special and unique to that person, so I don't
Mhm.
know, I think that's just, I personally experience that a lot with doing creative things. And again, I think a lot of people are like, oh, I wish I could, it's like sometimes you hear, like sometimes I would do open mics and read poetry. I didn't do this a whole lot, but we did open mics a lot at this like creative community center Daniel and I would help to run. And it's like, people would be like, oh, I wish I'd be like that creative. And it's like, you are that creative.
You can
Everybody's
be.
creative.
You can
And
be if
I
you
think,
want to.
what's that?
And so you can be if you want to.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe just empowering people to know like it's okay to want, it's okay, you can be if you want to, and doesn't mean you have to be, but if you want to. And often if you feel a sense of like lack, be able to face it in the empty canvas, right?
Mhm.
Be able to face it in the empty page, and see how much abundance and excess, the excess of that also is met in lack. You can find it there, and there's just something so fulfilling about it. I really am huge advocate for like that. So I'm so thankful to learn from your own experience with art therapy. It's been tremendous to learn more about it, so I appreciate you sharing.
A pleasure. I think that's a good way to close out the call today. So thank
Sounds
you
good,
for
Thomas.
thank you for this. And thank you everybody for watching, for watched
Yeah,
to this point.
yes, thank you all so much. Thank you, Thomas, again for your time.
Pleasure.